Chef Boyardee recently introduced something that they're calling Throwback Recipes. They took some of their popular canned pastas and changed the recipe to match what it used to be back in the old days. And they're doing this with 3 classics: Beef Ravioli, Beefaroni, and Lasagna. So I'd like to start off by saying that I'm kind of a sucker for anything in retro, throwback, or nostalgia packaging. You can pretty much take any modern product and throw it into old style packaging and I'll probably buy it. But Chef Boyardee actually takes that throwback idea a little bit further. Because this isn't just retro packaging, it's a throwback recipe. And so it is a little bit different. It also seems to be a little bit more expensive. My local grocery store has regular Chef Boyardee cans for $1.09, and the throwback recipes are $1.79. So when you're dealing with something that usually has a price point of around $1, that's a pretty hefty hike. And I thought it might be fun to do a little bit of a comparison and a little bit of a taste test between the regular and the throwback recipes. As a kid, and also to some extent as an adult, my favorite Chef Boyardee has always been Beefaroni. So even though there are 3 varieties, we're just going to check out the Beefaroni today. And let's start off by comparing the ingredients and the nutrition facts, and then we'll go ahead and heat these up and actually try them out. Alright, here's what the backs of the cans look like. I will say that the throwback recipe touts itself as having more meat, more cheese, and more goodness. I'm not exactly sure if the goodness refers to nutritional goodness or taste goodness, or both, or neither. But of course we are looking at 2 things that still are pretty similar, so I think the best idea is just take a look at the differences. In the ingredients, the regular Beefaroni has high fructose corn syrup, while the throwback just lists sugar. And then kind of a major difference, the regular version has textured vegetable protein, something that of course isn't found in the throwback. It also has modified cornstarch, which is not found in the throwback. And then this does tend to get a little bit complicated, but probably one of the other biggest differences is in the cheese. I'm going to read all the ingredients in both of these. In the regular recipe, it says enzyme-modified cheese. And that includes cheddar cheese, which is made up of pasteurized milk, cultures, salt, and enzymes, water, sodium phosphate, and xanthan gum. While the throwback has Romano cheese from cow's milk. The ingredients for that are part skim milk, cheese cultures, salt, and enzymes. So it's quite a bit of a shorter and more natural sounding list. And of course, if there is a big difference in the taste, a lot of that's probably going to come from the cheese, and the fact that the regular recipe has cheddar cheese and the throwback has Romano cheese. And then just to round out the ingredients, the last 3 listed on the regular are flavorings, that's all it says, is just flavorings, citric acid, and soybean oil. While the throwback has this more natural sounding olive oil, dried garlic, dried onion, beef broth, spice, and citric acid. And now I'm going to throw some numbers at you in the nutrition facts. And one thing to keep in mind here is that each of these cans has about 2 servings. It says serving size is 1 cup, servings about 2. I don't know too many people who would open up a can of Beefaroni and only eat half of it, and then save the other half for another meal, unless they're feeding 2 kids or something like that. But it is something to keep in mind with these numbers. The first number will be for the regular, and the second number will be for the throwback. Calories are 250 versus 260. Not that big of a difference at all. But calories from fat, 80 and 120. Total fat, 9 grams versus 13 grams. Saturated, 3.5 grams to 5 grams. And trans fat is 0 grams in the new one, because of course nowadays trans fat is a big no-no. But they do have it in the throwback with half a gram. Total cholesterol, 15 milligrams versus 25 milligrams. Sodium, 800 milligrams, or 33% of your recommended daily allowance, versus 980 milligrams, or 41%. Carbohydrates, 32 versus 28. Sugar, 6 grams, and this actually goes down to 4 grams. And protein, 9 grams to 7 grams. I'm not sure, but some of these differences could certainly have something to do with the textured vegetable protein in the new one. And now it comes time for the fun part, where we pop these cans, heat it up, and actually try it out. So let's heat them up. Alright, as a first visual of these cold, the regular recipe does look a little bit on the orange side, where the throwback looks more red. And it kind of looks like there's, it may just be the way it came out of the can, but it definitely looks like there's a little bit more meat and sauce in the throwback. And it also seems to be a little bit more runny, it has a little bit more liquid in the bottom. But let's see what happens when we heat them up. Alright, that looks good. It's cooked on a medium heat on the stovetop. And And there's the throwback. About as hot as they're going to get. Alright, and there we have our very hot current recipe and throwback recipe of beefaroni. They have a kind of a similar sort of smell. The current one, it's kind of a boring smell. It's kind of hard to explain. It just kind of smells like a combination of everything. Where the throwback, you can actually sort of smell the beef, and you can kind of smell the cheese. It smells a little bit more like real food. And I don't know how much you can tell here, but in the photos you can probably see that this definitely has a lighter appearance to it. The thing I thought was funny was when I poured this into the pan when it was cold, this actually seemed to be a thicker sauce. And once it was heated up, it actually thinned out and it became more runny, I guess. Whereas this one, when it went to the pan, it seemed kind of runny. It actually had some separation. I think that has to do with the more natural ingredients. It looked almost like it had water seeping out, and that was what made it really runny. But once it was heated, it became a little bit thicker. I mean, obviously it's still going to run through a fork, but it's definitely a thicker sauce than the current one. And it looks a little bit more rich. The meat it sort of sticks to the pasta better. Whereas this one, it just kind of like falls off of it and it looks really smooth. It seems like there's more meat in the throwback. And of course, you have to keep in mind that some of this meat in the current recipe isn't even meat. It's textured vegetable protein, which that obviously has something to do with the ingredients and the nutrition facts and everything. But also just something to keep in mind that it looks like you're getting less meat with this, and what isn't there as meat isn't necessarily all meat. So visually, this is a winner. But I mean, it's beefaroni. It doesn't really make too much of a difference. So what we need to do is we need to try these out. I'm going to start with the new one. And it's funny, too, that I don't see any reason to think that the pasta would be different, but it does seem to be a little bit different. Part of it's the color of the sauce, but it seems like the new ones are a little bit shorter. I don't want to contaminate that. Yeah, well, we'll just go ahead and test it out. So here is the current flavor. A little bit of everything in there. And it tastes like beefaroni. That's pretty much your standard beefaroni taste that I'm used to. And I wonder if this could have something to do with the fact that I generally don't eat this too often, but when I do, I kind of feel disappointed. It's almost like it doesn't live up to that child memory of these kind of foods. Pasta's a little bit on the mushy side. Mushy might be too strong a word, but it's definitely not. It's not particularly firm at all. And a pretty sweet sauce. Let's compare that to the throwback. I'm really looking forward to trying this. Oh, there is more flavor in this. As I was starting to eat it, basically I was about to say it was a wash, and they basically taste the same. Maybe some very minor differences, but this is definitely a richer sauce. I think those more natural spices and things, they kind of come through. You're really kind of tasting the dried onion and dried garlic, as opposed to the simple spices that are in this one. And it's also worth mentioning, speaking of the textured vegetable protein, that in the allergy warnings, the only real difference is that this one contains milk, soy, and wheat, and this one contains milk and wheat. And obviously that's due to the textured vegetable protein. Yeah, let me see. Let me first actually see if there's a difference in the pasta. It doesn't seem like there would be, but these the throwback, it is slightly firmer. I'm guessing it's the same recipe. The ingredients are the same. There isn't any reason for there to be a difference, but whether it's because of the sauce, I'm not really sure, but it does seem to have a little bit more of a firmness to the pasta. And it definitely feels like you're getting more meat, and the sauce is thicker, which is nice. This is just, it's so runny, you're just basically getting a slight covering on these as opposed to actually getting sauce on your fork. And I did choose to go with a fork just so you could kind of help with seeing how thick or thin the sauce is, and you can see how this is really just quite thin. It's actually harder to get to this because there's so much of it, but a little bit thicker in the throwback. Yeah, let me get one last taste and see what a final opinion on this. Yeah, if you were to serve me one of these one day and one the next day, I wouldn't think there was any difference. I would say they're the exact same thing. But having them side by side, it's not night and day, but there's definitely a difference. And you can kind of see why the throwback recipe is more expensive. I don't think this is something they could do on a regular basis because of the fact that it's probably a little more difficult to assemble this with these ingredients. And of course it does have trans fat in it. It doesn't have some of the modern things that you would expect to find, some of the weird chemical names and all that kind of stuff in here. So I don't know how long it's going to be on the shelf, but if you're into Chef Boyardee and you would like to have something a little bit better than the standard beefaroni, beef ravioli, and lasagna, I think it's worth giving a Throwback a try. Yeah, I think the realness of the cheese has a lot to do with it. It's the original with the cheddar with all those strange ingredients. And is the Throwback with the Romano. It tastes closer to the Romano or even like the Parmesan that you would pour on top of your own spaghetti if you're cooking it at home. This is definitely the best of the two. So that was kind of fun doing a little comparison between the current recipe and the Throwback recipe of beefaroni. I wasn't really sure how much of a difference to expect, and it's actually pretty interesting. As I said, I am kind of a sucker for throwback and retro packaging, but it's kind of nice that in this case it's not just the packaging, it's actually the recipe itself that's a throwback. Alright, so I was eating some more of these after the camera went off, and I have to say that I know I mentioned it wasn't night and day the difference, but the more of it I eat, the more it does seem like it was night and day. This Throwback, it really does taste like what you think Chef Boyardee is supposed to taste like. And I hadn't noticed it before, because this is all that there was, but eating the original or regular or standard recipe, it actually is kind of bland. It's overall, as you're eating the two of them, this is a lot richer. You really can taste the stuff. And in addition, I don't know how much you can see on here, but in addition to the meat in the sauce, which you can see how thick the sauce is, you can not only see the meat in there, but you can also see what appears to be little flecks of cheese or onion or garlic. And it does stick to the pasta better. The pasta is definitely a little bit firmer. This one, the sauce just kind of runs off of it, and there's really nothing to stick onto it. And in the end, it does kind of taste like it looks. This looks a lot more processed and a lot more bland and just kind of runny. This looks a little bit closer to real meat sauce. Obviously, it's still a processed thing. It's still a canned food, but it's a lot closer to what I remember Chef Boyardee tasting like. Thanks for joining me, and thank you for watching.